Good morning and for Hanukkah. We're on the bottom of page 1158 in Beis, volume 2. So we finished discussing four different efanim, four different types and levels of bittul of the oir. In other words, really explaining the personality and the purpose of oir, which is bittul. But in bittul itself, there can be different levels. There's the level of bittul of heder tfisas mokim, that it has no standing, has no value and function. Like you said, a bittul in the hispashtus, because it's in the presence, and feels the presence of something greater than it. That would be like the chacham katan, the presence of the chacham gadol, the lesser wiser person in the presence of a greater wiser person, the candle in the presence of the sun, the sunlight. The second level is called enzu loscha, where there it actually affects the actual mitzias. It's not just a bittul in the hispashtus and the extension and function, that it itself feels that its entire existence is only due to its source. Take away the source, it doesn't exist. The third level, efes biltecha, that even with the source, it doesn't exist, meaning it says it's only mitzias is that it's not atzmus. But everything else is really just a reflection of Atzmus. As you explained at length, especially in Tzadik Daled. And level 4, as the Rebbe puts it, the first three levels are all how Eir experiences it. And how about the Moir? How does Atzmus, how does the Moir look at Eir? That is the level 4. And Eir assumes that as well, because of its dveikus and its bittul. It also has the Dei Amitis, as he put it. The true perspective, das elyon, as it's from the perspective of the source. Now, if you remember in the beginning of the subject matter, when he said Kel Deus Havaya, he said you can't say das. He said das and das tachton is not just das elyon of the Beire, the perspective of the Creator, and das tachton is the perspective of the creation. He said since it says Kel Deus Havaya, that the Deus are in Havaya itself, that Elokus itself, meaning the Ayin itself, has these two perspectives. And he said, if you remember on page 1155, he said, it's not just that Atzmus, these were the words. It's not just that Atzmus sees the Oyer as Ayin, because obviously compared to Atzmus, it's just a reflection. But also the Oyer itself, and then he goes on to explain the different efanim. So if you really push it, you see that the words, how Atzmus looks at Oir, that the Rabbi uses in B'yem Hashminis Tavshin Tezvav, is really the language from Ayin Beis itself. It's just that the beginning, the Chiddush is that it's not just that Atzmus sees it that way, and now in level 4, the Oir also sees what Atzmus sees. Because of his bittul, like we learned, the Oir itself also has that perception. In other words, in addition to the first three levels, which is from the perspective of Eir, the Eir also has the perspective of the Moir, of Atzmus, in that sense, which brings it back and ties it all together. That at the end of the day, it's both. Das Ayin goes on the Beira, on the Yesh HaNivra, but it's also that the Ayin HaNivra has also this perspective, including the highest level of how Atzmus sees it. That's one thing I wanted to add. Another thing I want to say before we continue on, we spoke yesterday about the Yesh, the difference between Yesh and Oyer, how each expresses a different aspect of Atzmus. So as I explained, the Yesh is due to its actually not expression, because it does not in any way reflect Atzmus. That itself tells us that Atzmus is something beyond any type of expression. So I wanted to add that whereas Oyer, its whole mitzias is always bittul. So Oyer cannot reveal mitzias atzmus because Oyer doesn't have such an experience. It could reveal it only because Atzmus has it, so it reveals the concept. Once you know there's a yesh, like we learned, once you know the yesh reveals is express. The yesh is due to the fact that Atzmus is ein le'ila v'siba, so the Oyer also reveals that after the fact. But there's one more thing I did want to refer to. Earlier in Tzadik Daled, he did speak for not at length, But he said a lot when he said in the two shlilas, if you may remember the two shlilas in the Rambam, where the Rambam first says, Hu levadi emes ve'in la'achar emes kamitose. It says, Hu levadi emes ve'in la'achar emes kamitose. So he asked the question, what do you need this redundancy? Hu levadi emes. So then we already know, ein achar emes kamitose. So on the bottom of page 39 and 40, in Sadik Dal, when he explained the two, he said this is the difference between the Yesh and the Oyer. So there he said clearly that each one has a mila that the other does not have. Just to read a few lines. Nimtzad the Beis Ayin Shua Eir Hariyesh Bekol Echad BeMila Mamilas Haatzmus Baruchu. But Eir Hu Amila Shumei Namoyer. The Oyer, the mila is that it's similar to its source. It's a reflection of the source. It's similar to its source. Ubayesh, and the yesh, the mile in the yesh is, he said, Hamayl the sibis mitzvuseu koyach. Not that it reflects its source. The yesh does not reflect its source, because the yesh does not reflect anything. It only reflects itself. It only expresses itself. But it compels us to say, like he says, that the cause for the yesh to feel that it's a self comes from mitzvus atzmusei. And then he goes on to say, these are the two shlilos in the Rambam. But what's interesting, and I'm not going to go through the whole details because we learned it then, he says like this. He said there that Oyer, the Shlila Be'er Shlila Sa'er, he said is a deeper Shlila because, let me just a minute. Okay, because Oyer is attached to the source, so you could then mistakenly come to a conclusion that Oyer, the Yesh, is obvious at some point you come to recognize it's not a self-created entity. But the Oyer, you can give it more value because the Oyer is Megala Lakus. So it has a certain element of value to that. And he's B'Shelel, even that value, he says it's even a deeper Shlila or more Dakas Dika Shlila. Just wanted to throw that out into the picture. But the bottom line is the Yesh and Eir obviously are two opposite entities. Yesh has no bittul, Eir is bittul, the four levels of bittul. And obviously the goal is that the dira should be in tachtenim in the Yesh, but it should be a dira. So basically the gili habittul, the gili and bittul of Eir should become manifest in the Yesh, which initially has no gili and no bittul. Okay, fine. With that, let's go further now. Now he's going to go back to the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. It says, Omnom, bottom of page 1158. She says, Omnom. Now, however, by contrast, B'chinas Ayin shal Yesh HaNivra, all this was the Ayin of Yesh HaMiti, the highest levels of Ayin of Eir Bitl. By contrast, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, Mashanikra Ayin, as we learned earlier, it's not called Ayin because it's Ayin ve'efes. Because if creation exists, its source for sure exists. The Ayin legabi atzmos, legabi the moyer, the Ayin amiti, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, there the meaning of Ayin is kipshute, complete nullification, completely shalei be'erech. Atzmus is completely shalei berach, but the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra is the creative force that creates the Yesh HaNivra. So he says, Mashanikra Ayin ein zeh shu b'chinas Ayin be'etzem. There it does not mean that it's Ayin be'etzem. In the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti, we just learned Ayin Be'etzem on all four levels. Obviously, the fourth level is the deepest. But even the lowest level, it's all Ayin that fundamentally it's in a state of Ayin. That B'chinas Ayin Eina Begeder Mokel Yesh. Because that level of Ayin, the Ayin of Yesh Amiti, you can't even call a Moker to the Yesh. Because it's so beyond existence. You can't call him Moker. Once you explain that the Ayir on the highest levels of the Ayin Yesh Amiti is in a state of Heder Metzias, doesn't have any existence. Obviously, the third and fourth level, that's in the deepest way. But in general, it doesn't have any existence of its own, or it doesn't have any existence. How could that become a Mocker for something? It's completely absorbed and dedicated and devoted to the source. So you can't call it a Mocker for anything. The Gamit Sad My Losei ain't a begeder Mocker Liyesh. So not only due to its bittul, but also due to its quality. Remember, that oil is a very high level quality because it's entirely committed to, entirely connected, attached to its source. It says also mitzad etzmail, it's not begeder moker liyesh. We'll explain that in a minute. Let's just read it inside, then we'll explain. The oil hadovuk b'mkeidei harihu me'ein mekeidei. The oil that's attached to its source, what we've been learning till now, the Ayin of Yesh Amiti is talking now. It's me'ein mekeidei. Me'ein means similar, like the sunlight. Every light is similar to its source. That's one of the features of light, a built-in feature. There is no such thing as light or energy that is not similar to its source. Because light, all it is a reflection of its source. So it's me'ein mekeidei. Ve'ein be'erech li'ez b'chinas moker liyesh. And therefore, it's not commensurate. It's too beyond existence to be called a moker liyesh. Let me just go back and explain now what this means. If you recall earlier, when he first spoke about how the ayin divides into two, I'll refer you to the page. This is vital. This is very important. He speaks like this. On page 1147. If you don't mind, look there if you want. You'll see it will be helpful. So after he explained at length how the Yesh Amiti is only Atzmos, that's on page 11 till 1145. He said, I'm reading now from 1145, just a line or two. Because as I explained, it's too big of a leap. The Eibishter wanted that from a built-in Metzias, Yesh Amiti, should make sense. How does it make sense from such a distant, they're so different. So Oyer becomes the Mamutza. He says, Oyer Gili Me'atzmos, that Oyer, because it's Dovik to the Moyer, so on one hand, it reflects the Moyer. On the other hand, it begins to be able to relate to existence because it's already a Metzias Nimtza. So then, that's Ayin in general. In page 1147, he said, V'hine Ayin HaMamutza ben B'chinas Yesh Amiti Yesh HaNivra. He says, Yedua Shu Nechlak L'Shtayim. It divides into two. And there he explains what these two mean, because at the end of the day, to make it more logical, that we can understand the stages, both Mamayla Lamata, how God creates. And it's not with a leap. It's God's actually creating. It's not with a leap. It's in a progressive order, and also how we can climb Lamata Lamayla and do our Aveda. So then it makes sense that there's always gradations. So the Ayin of the Yesh Amiti represents the Koyach HaMahava, meaning the Koyach HaAtzmus, which is the source, which is the first stage that becomes an expression of Atzmus. And the Koyach of the Yesh, and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra is the oil that's mislabish, like he said. It's mislabish beprimius and becomes a mocker for the Yesh. So when we say Asarim HaMoros Nivra Elam, that's clearly the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. The Ayin of the Yesh Amiti doesn't have Asarim HaMoros yet. Because if it did, you wouldn't have real reflection of Atzmus. So that's what he explained there. Now he's going back and saying, and connecting it further. He's saying now, on page 1158, where we are now, he's saying, so the second level of ayin is different than the first, because the first one is not be'erech being a mocker. That's why it makes it very pristine and pure elokus. The second level of ayin, which is also koyach eliki, it's an eliki, but it's an eliki that is subject to gradations and simsumim and halamas, that will ultimately become the koyach hapoel benifel, that will be relate to each creation that you can call a mocker for the yesh. So he says, so that's what he's basically saying now. Now let me explain my loss, say what he means by that. So he says like this. So he's going back again, that the ayin of the Yesh HaNivra cannot be called ayin be'efes mamish, ayin be'etzem, because the ayin be'etzem, then it wouldn't be a mocker for the yesh. It has to be something there. If it was so bottle, like I explained with the difference between the chief of staff and the workers, or even the department heads. The chief of staff, his inyan is only to be dovuk and attached. He's conveying the orders of the king. The people who are working, if they want to be connected to the king and go to the palace, they won't do the job. They have to have some identity. Yes, the identity is to fulfill the mission that the king is giving, but it's very different, because the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, all it is conveying what the Yesh HaMiti wants. And its focus is only on the kavonos ha'atzmos of the source. The ayin of the Yesh HaNivra is also an ayin eliki, but its focus is on the job to get done, on the product. You need oyer, rakia, desha, daimim, tsameach, chai, medaber. There it needs focus that identifies with that part of the creation and existence. So to go back now, so therefore, the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, you can't call a mokel yesh, because it's heder hametzias. Its whole thing is looking to the source. It's facing the source and expressing the source. So you can't call the source meaning atzmus. So you can't call it a mocker to something else. It's like when the Talmud is facing the teacher, he can't be a teacher to other people. Even the lowest level of bittul, because he's now in presence of the source, and there is bittul. For him to create, to be a koyach that can be mahava and be a mokel yesh, requires a lower step. He says also the maila. I'll try to explain what he means. I think what he wants to say is that even when you talk about not the heder hametzias of the oyer, the heder hametzias means I have nothing. All I am is a reflection of my source. He's saying that even the maila of the oyer, remember the oyer does carry the koyach ha'atzmus to create. So it's not just heder metzias. It's heder hametzias allows the koyach ha'atzmus to flow through it. So I think he's saying, like he said before, if you remember in the level 4, he said it has yediyah and it has bittul. The oyer has both bittul and it has yediyah. That means it does have an element of, it has a function. However, the function is only expression of atzmus. So I think he's focusing that even the maila of the oyer, what it is, in other words, not just what it's not, also is not a mokel yesh, because it's me'ein mekede, because all it is just reflecting what its mokel is. So you can't say ina berech is bichens mokel yesh. Next page, 1159. We finally get to 1159. Umasha nasa b'chines mokel mitzias yesh, hu b'chines ha'ara da'ara lavad. So now the other side of it is, for it to become a mokel yesh, it cannot be this higher level of ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. What becomes a mocker, it has to be a reflection of a reflection. In other words, it can't be the oyer in its full intensity. It has to be a reflection of the oyer. And then it could become a relate to existence. So, for example, the light right near the sun, for instance, when the light is completely consumed by its source, it's too intense. When the light travels and gets more diminished, it's still light, it's still the sunlight. It's not a separate entity, but it became ha'ara of ha'ara like, then it can become mokel yesh. U'kamesha kosev, kinizgav shmei levade. Kinizgav shmei levade. That his name, God's name, So the word levade, that his name alone is nizgav, is exalted, is higher than everything. The gam chinish shmoi, the Rebbe Rashab explains, even the level of shmoi, not who, v'shmoi, who is etzem, shmoi. Shehi ha'ara levad. Shmoi is only a reflection. When you say the name of something, it's not the thing itself, it's the name of the thing. It's only a ha'ara. Harizeh b'chinas nizgav levade. Even the shmoi, even the oyr is also nizgav levade. It alone is beyond everything else. Obviously, who the etzem itself is beyond, but even the shmoi, v'rak heidu al erez v'shamayim, heidu v'ziv shel shmoi, and only the heidu. Here he means haid b'pashtus, the reflection of heidu v'ziv shel shmoi, that shines on earth and heaven. So what's he proving with this? I would say he's proving two things. First of all, that nizga shmei levade, that the oyr is only ha'ara, and only a ha'ara of the ha'ara radiates on earth and heaven. That's what it sounds like he's bringing proof, because he says it right after the words b'chinas mokel mitziyesh b'chinas ha'ara da'ara levade, nizga shmei levade, the cham b'chinas shmei she'ara levade is b'chinas nizga levade, v'rak heidu al erez v'shamayim, heidu v'ziv shel shmoi. Yeah, you have to say heidu v'ziv shel shmoi means a reflection of a reflection, because shmoi is already a reflection. So the first half states that the ha'ara, which is the ayin of the yesh hamiti, is nizgav levade. That's beyond being a mocker. And from that, there's a reflection that becomes a mocker and that radiates on earth and heaven. That's Pashtus, what he's saying in that statement. Okay. So what have we now moved toward? You see, he's moving away right now from the discussion. We've discussed the ayin of the yesh hamiti, and we discussed how it's completely bottled in all four levels. Now he's moving to the ayin of Yesh HaNivra, going to explain how it is divine energy, but it relates to existence. So this is really continuing where he left off, where I just referred you to on page 1147. That's where it all began. But there he moved to Ratzon, and then he spoke about the different levels of what the meaning of the first two levels of Ayin is. Remember, two levels before the Tzimtzum, Save and Mamala, or both in Mamala. And then he went into the four interpretations that we learned. That Kel Deis Havaya in the Eid itself. Now we're moving toward understanding what is this Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, which we cannot call Ayin ve'efes mamish. What can we say about it? That it's of a different substance than Yesh. That's why it's Ayin. The second reason, because bilti musug, with our instruments, the Yesh's instruments of understanding, we cannot understand it. It's a mysterious entity, this Ayin. That's why it's called Ayin. So it's Ayin relative to us, not Ayin be'etzem, because it's not Ayin be'etzem. On the contrary, compared to Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti, it's actually an existence, because it's Elokus being mislabish in the tzir of Nivraim, Yehi Eir, Yehi Rakia, etc. Using just Asara Mamoris as an example. So, okay. Just to refresh, and because I don't want it to be cryptic, just to refresh everybody's mind, let me just say this for a moment. To go back to the mashal of the artist or a builder of a home, when you are in the state where you first have a vision for what art you want to create, I should correct myself. When you have a vision that you want to create art, or you have a vision you want to create a building, at that point, there's no details. We want a home. I want to create some art. We mentioned even infinite possibilities. Once you get from the infinite possibilities to one, it's still all on your terms, on the creator or the artist's terms. You're not dealing yet with building, actually. So that's the ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. As we learned at length, within it will arise Ratzon Kloli, and Ratzon Prati, and Ratzon HaKodum, and the 10 hidden spheres. In those levels, you also can identify the different levels of bittul we spoke about. But that's all from the perspective of the creator. Even though he did say level 4 is the perspective of Atzmus, but the truth is the three levels, the next three levels are also completely bottled to Atzmus. Just a question, to what extent? But then comes another level of Ayin, where now you're ready to prepare to create. You need to now have, let's talk about an example of a building. You need to now hire a contractor, and the contractor needs to hire workers. You need electricians, and you need bricklayers, and you need plumbers, and you need the carpenters. You need a staff, because to create a structure, you need to apply yourself to the structure. And the Eibishter wanted to create the world in a way that he applies himself to it, not kol yachol or from a distance. So now, where does this come from? You could say it was all in the God's vision. That's God's vision. That's the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. But where does it come to in a way that we can understand? So there's the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, is the Elokus that's now going to be tailored. Eidus bekelim. That's why I said Yehi Eir, Yehi Rakia, Sarim HaMoris Nivra Elam. The Esser Sfiris, as they're structured. We're not talking how they're kolol be'etzem. And we're not talking about level 2, where they're still blima, without substance. Eidus and kelim. And the Eir HaChochmeh fits into the Klei HaChochmeh. And the Eir HaBina into the Klei HaBina. So whether it's an artist or a builder, now they're actually using their instruments that allow to channel the divine energy. Now, obviously, God forbid, there's no two godly energies. I mean, I should correct myself. There's no two gods, but the Keich Eliki, or the Eir Eliki, has now two tracks. One is conveying the vision of the whole picture, which is the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti that remains removed from the details, and like the Eir HaBli in a way. And one is the Eir HaGvul, which is Fedish deals with the details. So it's an Ayin that relates to existence. It's still Elokus, and Havaya Elokim, and Elokus in his purest form, but it's Elokus that's applying himself in a primistic way, as Chassidus explains, like Eir Pnimi versus Eir Makif in a general sense. That was one of the interpretations. There could be other interpretations as well in the two levels of Ayin. So I just wanted to spell it out because it's important to understand what he's saying here. So the level, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, its role is to bring that energy into a specific creation. But the energy still remains Ayin because the Nivra does not relate to it. The Ayin, the Ayin Eliki of the Yesh HaNivra relates to existence, Lefi Erech, but it's more of a Metzias than the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti. From the point of view of the Yesh HaNivra, the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra remains still elusive because it's not made of the same material, and it's not understood. So that's the two levels that we're talking about here. And of course, the goal, of course, is that the Yesh HaNivra should come to recognize the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra, and from that to grow to the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti in all the levels, all the way back to the Yesh HaMiti. That's obviously the goal. So now we're talking in the map, the part of the geography where we are now is we're moving now to the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra and its role and its function and how it manifests. Okay. So now he says, Va'inyan hu. The inyan of this is, Commission is bar la'el, like I explained earlier, the Yesh Shema Etzam v'Shema Pu'ula. That there's two names. Remember, he said, use the word shmoy, name. A name, on one hand, as we know, is just the name of something. It doesn't have any identity of its own. If you call someone Ruven, it's a name for Ruven, or for the person called Ruven. If you call something b'shmoy, let's say Chachma, it's a name for the entity called Chachma. But on the other hand, it's not Chachma itself. It's the name of it. So in the names, if you remember, we learned there's a bunch of levels of names. He's going to focus on Shema Etzem and Shema Pula. We also learned Shema Toyar, Shema Mushal, Shema Kinui. So names, there are different levels of names as they move away from the Etzem of the Inyan. So Shema Etzem, Shema Pula, if you recall, Shema Etzem is the name of the thing itself. You call something a Shulchan, the name of the table. A Shemesh, the name of the sun. But then there's a Shema Pula, which means the name of the functionality of the thing. So if you said, for example, a shulchan lilmoid alav, a shulchan to learn on the shulchan, what its function is. So there's a shema etzem and a shema pu'ula. Okay, the shema etzem, where did we learn this last? We learned that a number of times in Ayin Beis. I don't remember the last time, but it was a while back. Problem is we learned not the problem. We learned so many maimorim in between for Tzadik Dalet that may not be that far back. It's just that we learned so many other explanations. I'll look for it later. It's not negay right this second. Okay. The Shema Etzem, hu b'chinas gili min ha'etzem. You say Shema Etzem is the gili of the Etzem, v'dovuk u'b'miyuchad b'etzem. And it's attached or cleaved and bound, u'miyuchad, and united b'etzem, in the Etzem. V'shema pu'ula, and the functional name, hu lifil dover shul chutz le'etzem. That describes the function of this thing to affect something that's outside of the etzem. So he's going to use the explanation. He's going to use Havaya and Elokim as an example, I believe. Yeah. I want to use a good example that we can identify with easily. You know what? Let's read inside, and then we'll see what examples we may need. V'hein Hashemis Havaya v'Elokim. So one of the classic examples of etzem, Shema etzem, and Shema Apula is Shem Havaya and Shem Elokim. Remember, they're both Shemis. They're both from the Zion Shiva Shemesh She'enim Chakim. God's names that you're not allowed to erase. But there's a fundamental difference between Havaya and Elokim. The Shem Havaya nikra Shema Etzem. Shem Havaya is called the Shema Etzem. The core name, the essential name. The Rebbe often brings, when he speaks Shema Havaya, he says Shema Etzem, Shema Meyuchad, and Shema Mefurish. Shema Mefurish. The name that the Kohen Gadol said in the Kodesh Kadoshim by his tradition, the Beis Hamikdash and Yom Kippur. So Havaya, Yud Kei Vav Kei. So he says the Ima Yesh Shurak Shem, even though it's only a name. You're not saying it's the Etzem, it's a name, Shema Etzem. U'k'moy ani Havaya hu shmi. I am God, hu shmi, that's my name. How do you begin Shem? I'm sorry, hu shmi. So clearly it's only a name. Nevertheless, how do you begin Shem ha'etzem v'nikra shmi ha'meyuchad bi? So the pasuk here, you have two sides to it. One is, I am God, that's my name, meaning it's a name, my name, but it's shmi, my name. The name, it reflects of who I am. Like he says, shmi ha'meyuchad bi. So basically, Shema Etzem means a name that reflects who I am, not what I do. That's the key difference. Not my function, not what I'm achieving, but what I am. So it's giving you a closer taste, so to speak, to what the Eibishter is. The Shema Elokim, on the other hand, who Shema Pu'ula Levad. It's only a Shema Pu'ula Levad. It's still a name of God. But comparatively, it's not describing who he is, it's describing his function. Only his function. Bereshis bara Elokim. You're not just saying Elokim hu shmi, you're saying Bereshis bara Elokim. The name Elokim is the creator, is the creative force that creates. So you see from that's a Pa'ula. That's the Eibishter as he's doing a function. What is the function? It's called creation. We know specifically it's through the Tzimtzum, Elokim, Din, the Tzimtzum. But the bottom line is reflective of a function rather than of he himself. And Bereshis bara Elokim right away. Someone will say, is that all that God is? Is a creator? Obviously not. That's what he does. Can anyone else create? No. So it's dafke the Eibishter creates, but it's still the Eibishter in the Tziyur, or you could say in the form of a function, the function of creation. Whereas Havaya is Anish, Havaya hu shmi, that's my name, reflects me. In other words, all of me, or we shall learn what that means soon. How much of me? Okay. V'hari Shem Havaya, now he goes on. Shem Havaya mislabish b'Shem Elokim. Now the process how this works is that the Shem Havaya, the Shem Etzem, is mislabish in the Shem Elokim, in the Shem HaPu'ula. Let me give an example with us human beings for a moment. If so, the classic example of a Shem HaPu'ula and Shem Etzem would be Ruvain is an engineer. So the name Ruvain is a Shem Etzem, and the engineer, what's an engineer? Handas. An engineer is what he does. Or if you said Ruvain Hareife, Ruvain the doctor. So Ruvain is the name, his name, whatever the name reflects, who he is, whoever he is, and anyone who wants to call him by his name is Ruvain. But if you want to call him by his function, he's a doctor. Does he have other functions? Yeah, he could also be Ruvain HaKoyen, or Ruvain HaLevi, or Ruvain HaYisrael. These are already...
That's not a function. That's a toya. Ruvain HaKoyen. Function is Ruvain learned.
I just told you, no, Ruvain HaReife. Reife is a pu'ula.
Roitze is a toya.
Reife. Doctor.
It's etzem also.
No.
Hamerape is a pu'ula. Hamerape.
This is not about digduk. We're talking about you're describing, if someone comes to somebody, a human being, and says, who are you? Says, my name is Ruvain. What do you do? I'm a doctor. That's what I mean by pu'ula here. So same thing with the Eibishter. Let me go back. Havaya is hu shmi hamiyuchad. That's who I am. What do I do? What's my function? One of them is Elokim, Bereshis bar Elokim. What I'm coming to explain now is that they work together, because who you are is mislabish in what you do, in your function, in the function of the thing. So in that sense, the Havaya, that's what he's saying, is mislabish. That's what he says. V'harei Yishem Havaya mislabish b'Shem Elokim. The Ikerei Savus hu m'Shem Havaya. Because the true power of creation is not from Elokim, it's from the Koyach HaBeira, which is the Eibishter's power to create. Ulechein kol hanivroim hagam shehisavusim m'Shem Elokim, in the parentheses. That's why all the creations, all the creatures, even though technically it comes through Shem Elokim, because Shem Elokim is the instrument that brings that power of creation. We'll explain in a moment. Yechelim lahalul Hashem Havaya. They're able to praise Shem Havaya. Ukmeshikosav yahalul Hashem Havaya. If they are only relating to Elokim, because Elokim is the pu'ula of creation, so why are they saying yahalul Hashem Havaya? Because the truth is, it's Havaya working through Elokim. That's what he's saying here. To use the words of Shari Yichud V'Amuna, Shemesh U'Mogen Hashem Elokim. The power is Shemesh. Light comes from the Shemesh. But through the Mogen, through the sheath, through the filter, through the shell, is the light is able to reach us in a way that we can look at it, that we can relate to it. So the same thing is the Shemesh U'Mogen Havaya and Elokim. Havaya is the power of creation. But Havaya comes from is the Shem Etzem. For it to be able to be the way it's implemented is Shem Havaya radiates through Shem Elokim, through the Koyach Hadin V'Atzimtzum, that allows the Oyer to create and be received by the creation. So when you say Shem HaPu'ula, you're not saying it's divorced from, God forbid, or separate from Shem Etzem. You're saying the Shem Etzem is manifests itself in the Shem HaPu'ula. In this case, the process of creation. So he says, so Shem Havaya mislabish Shem Elokim d'ikar savus m'Shem Havaya. However, he says, Hine zehu rak ha'oreh da'oreh m'Shem Havaya. Because Shem Havaya is the Shem Etzem, and it describes the Etzem, not just that he's creating, his whole Etzem. So this part, how Havaya is mislabish and Shem Elokim, is only a ha'oreh of ha'oreh, a reflection of Shem Havaya, hamislabeshes b'Shem Elokim. So in other words, Havaya in its purest form is beyond creation, but it's the power to create. The actual creative process is Havaya being mislabish and Elokim, but that is already a reflection of the Havaya. So going back to the point of Ruvain, let's say the doctor, or Ruvain the engineer, or the artist, if someone to ask you what you do, does that reflect who you are? You'll say, it reflects a little part of me. So bottom line is the part of me that manifests in being a doctor or a lawyer or an artist or a rabbi or whatever it may be, whatever function I'm involved in, whatever pu'ula I'm involved in, and I'll agree, not even the description of being a doctor. When you are busy, let's say you're busy building something. You're in the active process of baking a challah for Shabbos. So someone will say to you, this baking of challah, does that reflect who you are? You'll say it's a ha'ara of my etzem is manifesting in my ability to bake, and that's what you have. So Havaya is a description of the etzem of the Eibishter's etzem. And Elokim is a reflection of that Shema etzem goes into the pu'ula, whatever the function may be. He's baking a challah, whatever it may be, and it's energizing that, and that ultimately becomes the product will be whatever that function is meant to achieve. That's what he's saying here. So you have a Shema Etzem, you have a Shema Pu'ula, and Shema Etzem is manifest as Shema Pu'ula, but only a small reflection of it. So in other words, an artist, when he's painting a piece of art, that's not a description of all of who he is. It's a ha'ara of who he is manifesting in his artistic work, and that's what you have. That's the difference between the two. And of course, he's going to use this to explain the difference between the Ayin of the Yesh HaMiti and the Ayin of the Yesh HaNivra. But let's see when he gets to that. Okay, so that question
we have.
1 second. Okay, remember the subject is not ending, is not over. He's going to now explain the difference between a ha'ara of a ha'ara and the etzem, the Shema etzem, which is also ha'ara, by the way, as he made it clear. Shmoy. Remember, even Shema Havaya is also shmoy, but it's a shmoya etzem. It's a ha'ara of the etzem, and the function that he's doing is only a reflection of the reflection of the reflection of the etzem. So there's the etzem. There's a reflection of the etzem, which is Havaya. There's a reflection of the etzem as it manifests in a particular pu'ula, which would be Elokim. Okay, go ahead. What's your question?
It sounds like we're missing the explanation of one level ha'ara. We said that the Shem Havaya is ha'ara, and the actual proof was ha'ara to ha'ara, and now we're saying that's what's mislavish in the hula is a ha'ara, the ha'ara of the first ha'ara.
What's wrong with that?
You seem to have 2 levels ha'ara after Shem. I don't know if it's right or wrong.
I don't think this is a number.
We're just saying that.
I don't think this is a numbers game. It's just an expression. He said clearly, Shmoy, he said, is Shmoy Shia Ora Levad, is Nizga Levad, and then there's the ha'ara of Shmoy. I don't think that's a diuk here, whether it's 1, 2, or 3. It could be ha'ara. Also, I don't think it's.
It's not a specific name. In other words, we're not skipping a name or something like that. It's
no.
Level of name.
He's not, no.
Okay.
Why can't you just say Havaya is a ha'ara and Elokim is a ha'ara of the ha'ara? It works.
That's fine. That's what he says to begin with. But then he says that Elokim is ha'ara, the ha'ara of Havaya.
No. Okay, so. No, ha'ara of the ha'ara of Shem Havaya.
A ha'ara that is Shem Havaya, which is ha'ara. Okay, that's right. I read it. Good. Okay.
V'ha'hefresh. And now the difference. Bein ha'ara, laha'ara de ha'ara. What's the difference between a reflection, meaning like Havaya is a reflection of the etzem, and a reflection of the reflection, which is Elokim, like a Shema Pu'ula? What is the difference? Yodua, it's known, the difference is the ha'arehi b'bchinas dveikus. The reflection, the first level of ha'ara is in a state of dveikus, attached. Ki kol oyer hu rak ziv ha'ara levad loy atzmi. Because every oyer, as we've learned, of course, is only a ziv ha'ara. I've translated, how did I translate ziv ha'ara differently? Basically a reflection and only an emanate, a ziv, a ziv and ha'ara have two different meanings when you bring them together, but basically both mean ha'ara, a reflection. Loy atzmi, that's the meaning of oyer. Oyer always is not an etzem, is the oyer of something. Umekol mokim, and nevertheless, hu b'chinas dveikus canal. So here's its paradoxical qualities. On one hand, it's not the etzem. On the other hand, it doesn't have any life outside of the etzem. What I mean by outside, I don't mean outside of, I mean besides the etzem. All it is it's attached to the etzem. A yesh, for example, is not that way. So that's oyer. That's ha'ara. So again, v'havish ben ha'ara la'ara la'ara yedua, the ha'ara hi b'chinas dveikus, ki kol rak ziva ha'ara levad loy atzmi, mokol mokom b'chinas dveikus kanal. As we explained earlier. What about ha'ara of a ha'ara? A reflection of a reflection. Ha'ara da'ara hi ha'ara nivdelis. Nivdelis is the opposite of davuk, of dveikus. Dveikus means one thing is not separate from another. It's attached. Like you see with every light, whether it's candlelight, whether it's sunlight, whether it's a light from a flame, a Hanukkah light, everything is, the light that comes off of it is connected to the source of the light. Sever between the two, and the light ceases to be. Ha'ara da'ara is saying is nivdelis, is separate from. Now, of course, the obvious question is, what does that mean? Ha'ara da'ara is still a reflection. So what was mean in nivdelis? So obviously the meaning is not nivdelis physically. It means it's not obvious or not as powerful, that connection to the source. Well, let's see what he says, and then I'll explain it further. There's a few ways to explain what means nivdelis, ha'ara nivdelis.
It's not the vagueness. It does not have the feeling to the mocker like the oil is completely dovik. Ha'ara is not connected to the mocker.
But how can you say that about ha'ara? There's no such thing as a oyer that's not connected, even if it's a reflection of a reflection. It didn't become. It's not yesh miyesh. It's a oyer. Like, for example, if you have, let's say, you're looking in a mirror and you see a reflection of yourself, then you take another mirror and you see a reflection of a reflection. Even if you have 1,000 mirrors, it's all connected to the original image. So what does that mean exactly? So I just said, hold up. We'll explain it. We don't have to, the Rebbe Rashab is in the middle of the Inyan. Let's see what he says. And then we'll see what he explains and what we needs more explanation.
A mirror is not oil, no?
It's a reflection. Oil is even more, but there's no such thing as oil that's not connected to Amoyer. We learned it everywhere. Do you see, can you give me one example of a order that is disconnected from its source?
100%. But mirror is different. Mirror is different. That's why I said oil is not a question. It's a reflection.
1 second. A mirror is a reflection. Air is a reflection. So give me an example of if you light one candle from another candle, yes, it's separate, but then it's no longer connected to the first oil. It's a separate oil. Anyway, let us continue reading and we'll see where it goes. Oil, we've learned till now that all oil is davuk to the moyer. So the question he's saying, the words nivdelis, but let's read on. We're learning a mimer. I always say I don't want to process without first absorbing. We're learning the Rebbe speaking now. Let's hear what he has to say, and then we'll analyze it. So right now he said the word, okay, that the difference is one is the davuk, even though it's not the atzmi, and the other is ha'ara nivdelis. It's a separate, whatever separate means, we'll soon see. Ubederech klal, and in general, hu b'chinas hamalchus, shu b'chinas nivdel. In general, this is referring to the level of malchus, that b'chinas nivdel is separate from its source. Ukiyadua, the koyach ha'isnasus, hu koyach nivdel mina etzem. The power of isnasus, meaning to be a melech, that you're above and you rise above others, is a koyach nivdel mina etzem. Why? Because malchus has nothing to do with who you are. It's only relation to the people you are a melech over. So, like we said before with the Shema Pa'ula, the Pa'ula does not reflect who you are. It's a ha'ara of who you are, or ha'ara de ha'ara, like he said before. So the fact that you are isnasus is not a koyach atzmi that reflects who the melech really is. And that's why you see that the people of an empire or a nation may know nothing about the king. Just because they know he's a king doesn't mean they know anything about him, about his personality, about his etzem. All you know, like he said, Shmoi, Shem Malchus Nikra Aleim, Shem Melech Nikra Aleim. You know that he's a king. He may not even know the difference between one king and the next king. Because the etzem koyach esnasus, even though it's a koyach, but it's a koyach nivdel that does not express the personality of the one that carries that name. So, so in general, being a melech, even if you're not talking in relation to the people, is koyach nivdel, like he says. And especially if you're talking in relation to the people, even more so, because that's even more distant from who he really is. As was explained earlier. V'hainu, and this means the gam b'chinas hamalchus. I'm sorry, v'hainu, the b'chinas hamalchus, this level of malchus, gam kamoy shehi b'atzilus. Even our malchus resides in atzilus, he b'chinas koyach nivdel. It's a faculty that's somewhat separate from the rest of the identity of atzilus. That's the mashal here. And for sure, how Malchus becomes a mokal biyah, that would be in snasus ala am. So even how the melech, even though he's not yet formally the king over the people, or he's in his own domain, the fact that you call him melech does not describe his etzem, just describes a part of who he is. And that's if that's a Malchus and Atzilus. And with Kolshken, for sure, how he's a melech, he becomes a melech over Biyah. Malchus Atzilus becomes Kesed of Biyah. That's over the Am, is even more nivdal from the etzem of Atzilus. So, for example, when you say the moichin and midas of Atzilus, Chabad Chagas of the melech, Chabad Chagas is beyond his malchus. Why? Because that reflects, I'm not going to call it atzmi necessarily, but it definitely is an expression of who he is. His wisdom, his understanding, his chesed, his gvura. It's still not his etzem, we know that. But compared to Malchus, Malchus is the last of the 10 spheres because it's the most removed. Because you have the least gilui of the melech, of the individual that becomes the melech. So though we know, we learn in Chassidus, in Derech Mitzvah Sechel, let's say Mitzvahs Minei Melech, that Shleima Melech was a Chochem. He used Chochem in his Malchus. That's correct. But the Etzem, a Melech is the level of Malchus. His Malchus Dikait is not necessarily a reflection of all of him. That doesn't mean the Melech can't use his Chochem and his Bina and his Chesed in his being a king, but the Etzem level of Malchus, that he's king, does not tell you about his wisdom or his other more internal faculties. So this is all coming to explain what means ha'ara va'ara, that it's not the reflection of the etzem of the entity. V'hinei. Oh, 1 second. I think we have
It has
stop.
to be a ha'ara, though. It has to reflect somehow.
Well, we said ha'ara v'ha'ara is also a reflection, but it's nivdal. His point, he's coming to explain that it's going to reflect. But just as I said, that when when the Rebbe sat down to let's say write something, so he's writing the Pa'ula, you can't say that's reflection of his whole etzem, but you can't say it's not a reflection of anything. It's a reflection of who he is. That's the point. That's what he wants. That's what he's calling ha'ara nivdelis. That's what he's explaining. What nivdelis means. Nivdelis means it's coming from him, but it's coming removed from reflecting his whole being. Anyway, it's not over yet. He's going to explain further. We'll stop here. So we're up to the line v'hinei ha'ikar. After he explained, and then he's going to go, yeah, this is a shtickle, a ganze piece here. Goes all the way till it's all the way till the end of the mimer, actually. Yeah, where he goes back to Das Tachten and Das Elyon. Okay, so good. So he began explaining what nivdal means. Nivdal means it's somewhat removed, even though it is part of who he is, but it's removed from the entirety of his etzem. Okay. So we'll stop here, middle of 11:59. And we'll continue on.